If there is one piece of information that should be saved from the great American memory hole, pondered, marveled over, and widely discussed, it's the following statistic from the Washington Post published on November the 9th, 2016. Quote, white evangelical voters voted in high numbers for Donald Trump, 80 to 16%, according to exit poll results. That's the most they have voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 2004, when they overwhelmingly chose President George W. Bush by a margin of 78 to 21%. End quote. If you look at the recent trend, the data suggests that while the overall percentages do not vary widely, W. Bush in 2004 gained 78% of the evangelical vote, Senator John McCain got 74% in the year the Great Recession began, and 2012 saw the number stabilize again at 78% for Governor Mitt Romney, the vote for Donald Trump exceeded them all, a high watermark of evangelical preference. A statement vote, if you will. The Post goes on to quote Nate Silver, who believes the support of evangelical Christians played an outsized role in Trump's unexpected victory. If there is a single group he can thank, it is church-going evangelicals, and especially those living in the Midwest, in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa. The reason this information is relevant is obvious, or rather it should be obvious to any rational citizen who has been monitoring political trends over the past half-century. The evangelical Christian voting bloc has been the cornerstone of the Republican Party for the same length of time. The Christian right went so far as to give itself the title and now defunct political organization known as the Moral Majority in the 1980s, and waged a series of either failed or disastrous but ongoing culture wars and legislative assaults on liberty. Moreover, evangelicals are perhaps unique among the largest sought-after voting blocs in that they argue and appear to genuinely believe that their quote-unquote Christian values guide their selection of candidates, and their moral standards come from none other than God Himself. The Christian religion is founded on the model and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, an apocalyptic preacher who roamed the Roman province of Judea sometime in the early part of the 1st century. While there is a debate about the historicity of the figure, generally speaking, scholars believe that he probably was indeed a real person, and something of the core of his message was probably preserved in many writings. Evangelical Christians look to the 4 Gospels, which were eventually canonized in the Bible, for information about Jesus. And here's where it starts to get strange. Because if you spend an hour or two with the Gospel of Mark itself, the oldest of them, you are met with a figure whose most surprising characteristic is not his miracles. Lots of gods did weird, wild shit back in the day. It's that his entire philosophy of life flies directly in the face of the quote-unquote establishment. This maniac Messiah was a Jew, as religious as the day is long, but here we find him whiling away the hours with whores, tax collectors, thieves, and all kinds of illegals. He preached love for the poor, for the sick, and for the oppressed. Those who came to him with grandiose notions of a mighty political kingdom, like any other self-respecting god or demigod or white nationalist would forge, were shut down. Nowhere did Jesus speak about the accumulation of wealth or power, much less espouse the glories of capitalism to come. Instead, he chided the rich, demanded they give up their earthly possessions and instead devote themselves to a path of loving service to the poor, criminals, sinners, outcasts, foreigners, and the dispossessed. Anything less, and your camel would have a better shot squeezing into your Prius than you do seeing paradise. He told them that though they would lack the outward signs of power and prestige that come with earthly service for earthly rewards, but not to worry, because that didn't matter. Like at all. We at Swing State would not be the first on the left to point out that Christians now and then fail to meet the standards their doctrine sets for them and they, in turn, preach for others. We would also not be the first to notice the unsubtle differences between what is preached from pulpits and the policies the religious right prescribes. Invade Iraq and take their oil, because His love endures forever. But it would be a disservice to history to let it pass without comment that the same people who preach the fundamental good and necessity of their religion in politics are guilty of electing the most morally reprobate candidate in our lifetimes. When it comes to the subject of wealth, Donald Trump is a proponent of it, to say the least. Trump is literally obsessed with the state of his finances. He spent a year going around the country boasting about his money, telling audience after audience how large his fortune was, how intelligent he had to be to gain it, and downplayed or ignored the truth about it in the seedy tactics he used to enlarge what he inherited. His charity, we discovered, was a front, later shut down by the state of New York, that Trump used to filter money others had given him while pretending to be the donor. And in several documented cases, money given to his charity was used directly to benefit Trump. In one case, it was reported that several $1,000s went towards the purchase of a portrait of himself. Casting a wider net, but sticking just to his admitted sins, Donald Trump has been married 3 separate times. He has admitted on tape to propositioning women who were not his wife while still married. He has been accused by multiple witnesses of entering the dressing rooms of beauty competitions that he ran so he could inspect the wares personally, including pageants featuring minors. And he has boasted about grabbing women by their genitals and kissing them without their consent, which is in legal speak, Title 10, United States Code, Section 910, Article 120, any person who commits a sexual act upon another person when the person knows or reasonably should know that the other person is asleep, unconscious, otherwise unaware that the sexual act is occurring, is sexual assault. He admitted it on tape. More than a dozen women came forward to accuse him of doing the exact thing he bragged about doing and doing regularly. Trump claims to be a Christian. Of that there is no doubt. He once claimed that the Bible was his favorite book. The ghost-written Art of the Deal was a close second. But when asked to recite a favorite passage, one single verse that inspired him to do good or consoled him in a time of grief and pain, he failed. When trumpeting his religious convictions to another flock of sheep, he referred to the book of 2 Corinthians as 2 Corinthians. A minor mistake, but one which no church-going Christian would ever make, because the pronunciation of 2 Corinthians, like every other two-part set of books in the Bible, is always second and not two. I've lived my lifetime around Christianity, and Trump is literally the first person I've ever heard pronounce it that way. It's exactly the kind of small but revealing mistake someone posturing as a Christian would make. Even if we pretended for a moment that the power of Christ compelled Trump to an act of repentance for the previous part of his terrible, wretched, empty life, we are still no further in explaining the choice of evangelicals. For one thing, Trump once boasted, again on tape, that he had never asked God for forgiveness. Not once. Ever. This is, of course, a problem when we recall that evangelical Christian churches have propounded forever that conviction and genuine repentance were absolutely vital, completely instrumental in bringing about the born-again conversion. But Trump isn't sorry. He is near incapable of even feigning apology and completely incapable of an authentic one. Only when the ramifications are so dire, like when the Access Hollywood tape was revealed, will Trump stoop to mimicking an act of humility. But even then he will hedge, blame, and excuse himself. Not exactly the signs of someone who's been convicted by God in his spirit. So, how do we explain this? As a free-thinking American citizen, I am not personally bound to all of the moral judgments evangelicals theoretically would make. I may not have a particular issue with his 3 wives, or 5 wives for that matter, and I may have a slightly higher threshold of proof for claims made against a wealthy celebrity before I'm willing to bayonet somebody in the street over it. But that hardly explains the moral majority. What's their fucking excuse? You can't play the few bad apples card here. This shit is statistical. Evangelicals broke records voting for Trump. If stats were royalty, this lot made Trump their king. This man represents who they are. How is that even possible? Well, if you're scratching your head trying to figure out the answer, ponder this and it may dawn on you. According to the Public Religion Research Institute, in 2011 only 30% of white evangelicals thought someone who is immoral in his personal life could be expected to behave morally in his public life. In October of 2016, researchers found that number had shot up, no, not quite saying it, more than doubled to 72%. If that doesn't sound bad, imagine your doctor saying the flesh-eating bacteria has spread from 30% of your flesh to 72% of your flesh, and see how you feel. In a span of 5 years, the collective moral beliefs of the entire enterprise completely reversed. Their pliability on supposedly unchanging ethical questions was so profound it outstripped the all-Americans category. The 44% of us in 2011 who thought you could get a Hummer in the Oval Office and probably get up for work the next day expanded to 61% in 2016. Which are frankly embarrassing levels next to the evangelical. Their morality of convenience can't even tolerate the constitutionally allotted 2 terms or 8 years. They get it done in 5, apparently, if it needs doing badly enough. Friends, I've heard it said that the Bible is the big book of multiple choice. It doesn't so much give you the answer as you read it and will create whatever answer you want, or, usually for a fee, someone will make it for you. They'll smooth it over or tie this passage with that so that it sits better. And I can't help but reflect on this when I consider that I directly witnessed the political charade of 2016, when the religious right hurled themselves in droves, record-setting droves, for someone antithetical to every preachment ever uttered by their founder. And here perhaps at last is the answer. I suspect in the end their religion is the same as their morality. Convenience and little else.